Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the second shelf and to another tops and flops video. Um, for those of you who might be not familiar with my tops and flops series, it's a video that I filmed at the beginning of a new month, looking back at the previous month, and I pick a couple of books that I thought were top reads and a couple of books that I thought were less top reads. So here are my tops and flops for the month of May. And as always, I start my tops, if possible, with the best reread of the month. If you follow me, you know that in 2019 I really tried to reread books. And one of the projects, quote unquote, is to reread Jane Austen's novels in chronological order because I read them when I was quite young. But I read them all in the German translation, so I've never read them in the English original. And my best reread was indeed a Jane Austen. Where do I have it here? And that is her third published book, Mansfield Park. She published it in 1814. And I always have and had and will have a soft spot for Fanny Price. I know Mansfield Park is not the most beloved of Jane Austen's novels, but for me, yeah, I like it. The book is centered around the main character, Fanny Price, who comes to live with her very wealthy relatives. Her own mother has made not so, fortunate marriage, and they suffer for money. And Fanny, when she is in her early teens, is sent to those relatives to live there. And then the story develops from Fanny when she is in her early teens until she is 18. And we see her, struggling with her new surroundings, missing her family, but also encountering quite some, not so nice behavior from her two female cousins. And the only one who is actually nice to her is the second oldest son, Edmund, with whom she develops a friendship. The man of the household, Sir Bertram, is nice but aloof. And his wife, who is the sister of Fanny's mother, she is indolent. She actually doesn't do anything through the whole book. And then when Fanny is a little bit older, a couple arrives from London, a brother and sister, Henry and Mary Crawford, and they sort of, boil up the situation there, and Edmund falls in love with Mary, and Henry seduces various women in the household. I really enjoy this book. I think the plot is funny. It's a little bit more edgy because you have women in the early 19th century who actually cheat on their husbands. You have there's a scene where when Sir Bertram is away in the colonies to look after his affairs there, a group of the young people decide to enact a play, and what that be. Yeah, I like Fanny Price and I like Mansfield Park. So this is my pick for the best reread of the month of May. The second book of my tops of May is the book that surprised me the most. And as you know, if you follow this series, I always pick a book that if I read the summary or the kind of book, the genre it is, that I would say that's not a book for me. And I'm not big on historical fiction, that's just not something I read very often. So my most surprising book was this one, The Illumination of Ursula Flight by Anne Maria Crowhorst, published in 2018. And I've seen Mel from Mel's Bookland Adventure rave about this book last year. It was longlisted for the for a book prize, the Walter Scott, that was it. Just think, and then you will come to it, the Walter Scott Prize. And I read this in May as a buddy read with Doris from All the Books, and that was a delight in and of itself, because it's so much fun to read books with you, Doris. But anyway, this book is, as I said, historical fiction. It starts in 1664, so it's in the Restoration age in England. Charles II, when our main character Ursula is born, and the book follows her life until her adulthood, when she's almost 20, told from her perspective. She is she's an intelligent child and quite unusual. She also gets, for a female, I mean unusual, she gets quite a bit of education from her father. You know, she learns to read the classics, Greek and Latin. She learns mathematics and some astronomy. But then, of course, as it happens when you are a young woman in the second half of the 17th century, when she is 15, she's married off to a much older man, 20 years her senior, Lord Terringham. And that's not a happy marriage. And then it all develops from there. I don't want to spoil you, so I'm not going to tell you the story. But what I will say is that Ursula, from a young age on, she loves to write, and she loves to write plays. So within the book, you not only have the regular story told in first person from Ursula's perspective, but you also have inserts of letters, of diary entries, lists she makes of what she likes and what she doesn't like, and short snippets of plays where she tells us of things that happened in the form of a play. This book was an absolute delight. It was fantastically researched. You had this feeling of utter trust in the author, and you just went along for the ride as a reader, and I love if that happens. It was also very humorous. Ursula has a really matter-of-fact way of telling us about her unhappy marriage, and she talks about sex, and she talks about getting her period, and things that you normally don't encounter that much, even in historical fiction about that time. And it's all done with a lot of depth, but also with a lot of humor, especially when the bad marriage progresses and Ursula has to make decisions about whether or not to stay in the marriage and what she wants to do with her life. It's fantastic. It's absolutely fantastic, and it was the biggest surprise for me. I mean, not maybe completely, because I knew from Mel's raving review what the book would entail, but I wasn't sure that I would like it, and I absolutely loved it. If you're into historical fiction and this kind of very strong-headed, independent, humorous female protagonist, I can, with all my heart, can recommend this book. The third book in my tops category is the book that I thought about the most, and it's a book that took me a while to get into, and that is Han Kang's Human Acts, translated from the Korean by Deborah Smith, published in 2016 in the English edition. I read this also as a buddy read with Jacqueline from 6 Minutes for Me, and I think I can say that, Jacqueline, I hope, we both struggled in the beginning to get a feel for the book, to get a feel what is the author trying to do. The book tells us about an event that happened, historical event in South Korea in 1980, a student uprising. One dictator was assassinated and a new dictator took his place, and the student uprising was quelled with quite some military force. A lot of people were killed, people were arrested and tortured. Not a story you might enjoy. So I cannot say I enjoyed the book, if you know what I mean, because it's just too grim. The story is told from 1980 to 2013 in chapters, starting with one young boy, Dang Ho, in during the uprising of 1980, and he is still in high school, in middle school, and he's 15 years old. I think I said that already, and he helps two other young women in an office building, trying to care for the dead bodies there. They are kept there, for want of a better word, so that people can come and try to identify their relatives. And from that tale, we move on to Dong Ho's friend, who was killed. And then we move on to one of the other two women who were present at the provincial office to care for the bodies. So it progresses in time, and we get all kinds of different perspectives, centering around the events of 1980, but also dealing with the aftermath. What happened to those people, Dang Ho and the two young women and a young student who were in that office caring for the dead bodies in 1980. We see the perspective of Dang Ho's mother. We also have the perspective of a prisoner who has been captured during the uprising and tortured. It's a grim, very grim book, and it doesn't shy away of giving you details of physical pain and physical torture. Its main theme, at least for me, was the question of how does the soul, the spirit, deal with what happens to your body. So if you are tortured, if you die, the second chapter from the perspective of Dang Ho's friend is told after the friend died. So it's addressing questions of humanity in terms of the body is treated really badly, really horribly, and what does that do to your soul and to your spirit, and how does a person later on in life try to come to terms with what happened to them during the uprising. I ended up loving this book, like I said, not enjoying it in the true sense of the word because it's just too grim, but I thought it was a fantastically written or translated work dealing with events in South Korea I have very little knowledge of, and questions beyond the particular event. So that's why I kept thinking about this book. It was the book that I thought about the most because it addresses questions that go far beyond those particular events in South Korea. I highly recommend it, but also tell you, brace yourself, it's a grim read. So those were my three tops, or the top picks of the month of May. We move on to the flops. And I have to say, it was a good reading month. So I don't have books in the flops category that are, bad books or books that really annoyed me. But there are still two books that I thought, we're just not as good. And the first one is probably a controversial pick, but you know me, always in for a controversy, and that is Charlotte Bronte's book Jane Eyre, which I also reread now in English. I had read it in the German translation many years ago, published in 1847. I just don't like this book very much. There you go. I think, first let me tell you the story if you don't know it. The main character, Jane Eyre, is orphaned at a young age, and then she is made to live with relatives, a sort of a Fanny Price theme, with her aunt and uncle and a son, so her cousin, and they all treat her horribly. When Jane is a little bit older, she is sent to a school for orphaned girls where she learns to become a teacher, and then she takes a position as a governess of a rich man, Lord Rochester, and it's not his daughter, but his adopted daughter, Adele. There is some secret going on in the attic. It's not a spoiler, you know that. Of course, Lord Rochester's first wife is mentally ill and kept hidden in the attic. And then all kinds of shit happens. I why I didn't really like the book is a couple of things. First of all, I think the characters are very, very one-dimensional. Jane is good and good and good, and she is treated badly and badly and badly, and it annoys me a little bit. You know, the self-righteousness that springs off the page with Jane characters just doesn't do it for me. Lord Rochester is socially inept, just like Jane, and the conversations between the two, once Jane takes the position as a governess, it's just, you read this and you think, really? That's how you talk to each other? And of course, then they fall in love, even though they have the most inept conversations. It's really weird for me. And the character of Lord Rochester is also very one-sided. He is just quite a cruel and horrible person in the sense how he treats Jane and how he talks to her. But of course, she falls in love with him anyway, and he with her. And then the story, up to the point where Jane starts to live with Rochester, the story is okay. It has its length, I think, but that's in an 1847 novel. They had a different way of telling a story, so okay. But then something happens and Jane flees and she finds refuge with a pastor and his two sisters. And that goes on for quite a while, and it felt for me as if this is a completely different book and a completely different story. So, yeah, I mean, I know a lot of people love Jane Eyre, and I can see, you know, the appeal, but for me, it's one of the classics that just doesn't do it for me. Live with it. And the fifth and final book, the second book in my flops, is a debut novel, Joanne Ramos' The Farm, which was published in the spring of this year. It's a sort of a dystopian premise, young women who carry children for rich couples, and they are, during the pregnancy, secluded in the farm, hence the title. I thought this premise sounded interesting. But we follow then mainly one character, Jane, a young woman from the Philippines who struggles as a single mother and leaves her child behind in order to carry out a pregnancy for an unknown rich couple. So she lives in the farm for 9 months. You can't leave there. That's one of the prerequisites. It's never really clear why. I mean, it needs to be this way for the plot, but it doesn't, make sense if you look at the broader picture, because it's also never explained why these women wouldn't be allowed to leave during the pregnancy. Also, not why the identity of the parents is kept secret. Again, there is a need for that for the plot. And if you hear me talk about that, that already sums up the problems. The premise is interesting, but the execution is just, it's sort of a fluffy way of structuring a book. Jane, of course, then struggles because she can't see her daughter, who she left behind, with an aunt, and the aunt doesn't do a good job. And then she is allowed to Skype, but not allowed to visit. Yeah. Bookish. I will pay another fortune for the royalties because it's a meh book. It's not bad, but it's just, it was boring. Sorry. Yeah, didn't really work for me. Anyway, those were my tops and flops for the month of May. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. Let me know whether you read any of the books, especially Jane Eyre, of course, and what you thought of them. And I'll see you all in the next one. Bye-bye.